Bruno Mars would catch one for you, Steve Rogers jumped onto one before becoming Captain America, and aside from horseshoes, it's the only throwable object where being close counts. It is, of course, the hand grenade. A staple of real armies and fictional action heroes the world over, these palm-sized balls of destruction are the ideal means of clearing out the room, trench, foxhole, or bunker ahead of a heroic assault. But while today these weapons are an indispensable part of every infantryman's arsenal, this was not always the case, and the hand grenade in its modern form is only a little over a century old, though the basic concept is much older. From medieval castle sieges to the trenches of the Great War to the modern battlefield, this is the brief history of the hand grenade. Just before we get into humans inventing handheld ways to blow each other up, as we've covered before on our video and ultra deep dive into how to get the best possible sleep according to science, good quality sleep is one of the most important things you can do for both your short and long-term physical and mental health, along with avoiding being in the vicinity of a hand grenade when it detonates. To help out with the former, enter today's sponsor, NOLA Mattress. For those unfamiliar, NOLA's award-winning mattresses are known for their amazing comfort, pressure relief, cooling, and durability, and they ship right to your door for free. No showroom weirdness, no middlemen to jack up the price, no human interaction, which everybody knows is the worst. Their mattresses are made to order in their factory in Arizona, where they make everything right down to doing their own coiling, foam pouring, and cutting, sewing, you name it, start to finish, all in-house. On top of that, unlike a lot of online mattress brands, NOLA's are fiberglass free, and they're also Green Guard Gold and CertiPure US certified, so you can know for sure you're not breathing in a cloud of sketchy chemicals every night. Ordering is easy, shipping is free in the US, and you get a 120-night trial to make sure it's right for you. On top of that, their mattresses also come with a limited lifetime warranty beyond. As a side sleeper with some back issues who traditionally has never, it turns out, had what one would call an ultra quality mattress before, including, funny story, throughout high school sleeping on a travel trailer pull-out couch for 5 years, which I'm sure isn't where my back issues came from, nor from that time I was sledding down a very steep mountain, jumped off my sled to try to stop before hitting some trees at the bottom, only to find out my down-filled Parker was just as good as the sled for speed on snow. It was totally cool though, because a giant tree with an assist from my spine helped me stop instantly before I got all the way to the bottom. In any event, let's just say my NOLA Evolution mattress has been something of a game changer for less tossing and turning. It's extremely comfortable and supportive, pressure relieving, and doesn't turn into a furnace at night. It's honestly a little weird not waking up every couple hours to turn over, but here we are. I love my NOLA mattress, and I think you will too. So if you're waking up feeling like you went 10 rounds with your mattress or just want to upgrade your sleep experience as well, head to nolamattress.com/TIFO and use our code TIFO to get $50 off plus 2 free pillows with select mattresses. And note, this is an additional discount on top of what is being offered on site, so check them out while you can. Good quality sleep is literally key to improving all facets of life, so do go check them out and see if they can't help you wake up feeling more rejuvenated as well. Now let's get back to the rather fascinating history of humans blowing each other up with handheld explosives. If one interprets the term broadly, the hand grenade actually predates the invention of explosives. In the 8th century AD, the Eastern Roman Empire, aka the Byzantine Empire, made extensive use of a powerful incendiary weapon called Greek fire to set enemy ships ablaze. This substance, whose exact composition has been lost to history, was not only sprayed from flamethrower-like pumps fitted to the Byzantine ships, but also packed into grenade-like stone or ceramic jars that could be thrown at the enemy to set them ablaze. Greek fire played a key role in repelling the Arab sieges of Constantinople of 674 to 678 and 717 to 718, and allowed the Byzantine Empire to survive for another 700 years. However, hand grenades as we understand them today are explosive devices, so the development had to await the invention of the world's first explosive, black gunpowder. As covered in our previous video, Who Invented Gunpowder, while the precise origins of black gunpowder are disputed, the substance, a mixture of potassium nitrate or saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, is widely thought to have been invented in China in the 9th century AD during the Tang Dynasty. By the Song Dynasty of 960 to 1279 AD, Chinese soldiers were regularly using weapons with the awesome name of thunder crash bombs made by packing gunpowder into ceramic, metal, or bamboo containers and setting them off with a rope time fuse. Similar terracotta grenades were also used by the Persians in the 12th century. Hand-thrown bombs comprising small, hollow cast iron spheres filled with gunpowder began appearing in Europe in the 15th century, with their first recorded use in combat being from 1536, when French King Francis I laid siege to the city of Arles. It is around this time that these weapons acquired the name grenade from various Latin-derived words for pomegranate, as the large grains of gunpowder used in the early grenades were thought to resemble the seeds of the pomegranate fruit. These weapons were often carried in a special pouch or pocket called a grenadier, the likely origin of the term grenadier for a soldier who specialized in throwing grenades. These early grenades were set off using a length slow match, a type of time fuse made by soaking cord in a solution of potassium nitrate and water and allowing it to dry. This fuse was in turn ignited by another length of slow match carried by the grenadier. Throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance periods, grenades were mainly used as a defensive weapon to ward off besieging armies. By the 17th century, however, they began to be used in open warfare, and units of specialized grenadiers were established by many European armies. In the British Army, grenadiers were distinguished by their tall, pointed hats, which allowed them to quickly sling their muskets and free up their hands to lob grenades. The first recorded use of grenades by British troops were at the 1689 Battle of Killiecrankie and the 1719 Battle of Glen Shiel during the Scottish Jacobite uprisings, though the weapons were not well liked due to the unreliability of their fuses and explosive fillings, especially in damp weather. This, along with continuing improvements in firearms technology, which allowed armies to fight at longer distances, led to a sharp decline in the popularity of grenades. Nonetheless, grenadier units were retained as elite assault troops, while the image of the 17th century flaming grenade continues to be used in the heraldry and insignia of many military units. Over the following 2 centuries, grenades largely fell out of favor and were seldom used in combat. But this did not stop inventors from trying to sell newfangled designs to the military. In 1831, English merchant William Bickford solved the primary shortcoming of early grenades by inventing the safety fuse, composed of jute yarn woven over a core of gunpowder and waterproofed with a coating of varnish. This fuse burned at a consistent rate even in wet weather and was widely adopted in the mining industry for blasting work. It was also integrated into the standard issue Bickford grenade, which the British Army did not declare obsolete until 1902. Over the next 3 decades, dozens of inventors, including William Parler and William Spencer, submitted designs for sophisticated impact-fused hand grenades to the British Army Ordnance Board, but all were rejected, the board declaring them ingenious, but not applicable to His Majesty's service. When grenades were used, it was typically under conditions of siege warfare, the weapons often being improvised from available materials. For example, during the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, British Colonel Hugh Robert Hibbert reported the following from the siege of Sevastopol. "We have a new invention to annoy our friends in their pits. It consists in filling empty soda water bottles full of powder, old twisted nails, and any other sharp or cutting thing we can find at the time, sticking a bit of tow in for a fuse, then lighting it and throwing it quickly into our neighbor's pit, where it bursts to their great annoyance. You may imagine their rage at seeing a soda water bottle come tumbling into a hole full of men with a little fuse burning away, as proud as a real shell exploding and burying itself into soft parts of the flesh." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, hand grenades were far more popular, and multiple types were widely used by both sides during the American Civil War of 1861 to 65. One of the most popular types was the Ketchum grenade, invented by William F. Ketchum, mayor of Buffalo, New York, and officially adopted by the Union Army in August 1861. Produced in 1, 3, and 5-pound variants, the Ketchum grenade comprised a football-shaped cast iron body filled with gunpowder, fitted with a tail and cardboard fins for stabilization, and a plunger at the front with a percussion cap fuse that would detonate the explosive on impact with the ground. Some 90,000 Ketchum grenades were produced by the end of the war, the weapons being extensively used during the 1864 sieges of Vicksburg and Petersburg. They were also copied by the Confederates and renamed the Rains grenade after General Gabriel Rains of the Confederate Torpedo Bureau. And it is worth pointing out here that at the time, the word torpedo referred to stationary explosive charges, what we today would call land or sea mines. To cut down on costs, the Rains grenade replaced the tail fins with a cloth streamer and featured a simpler detonating mechanism. But while more sophisticated than any service grenade which had come before, even the original Ketchum grenade proved unreliable in combat, with Union troops quickly discovering that the nose plunger had to strike the ground at a precise angle in order to work. This led the Confederates to develop some comically simple countermeasures, as Lieutenant Howard C. Wright reported during the 1863 siege of Fort Hudson, Louisiana. The enemy had come this time prepared with hand grenades to throw into our works from the outside. When these novel missiles commenced falling among the Arkansas troops, they did not know what to make of them, and the first few which they caught not having burst, they threw then back upon the enemy in the ditch. This time many of them exploded, and their character was at once revealed to our men. Always equal to any emergency, they quickly devise a scheme. Spreading blankets behind the parapet, the grenades fall harmlessly into them, whereupon our boys would pick them up and hurling them with much greater force down the moat, they would almost invariably explode. But while the Ketchum was the most commonly used grenade of the American Civil War, it was far from the only one. There was also the Haynes Excelsior, invented by William Haynes in 1862. Resembling a miniature sea mine, the Excelsior comprised a baseball-sized iron sphere filled with gunpowder and covered in short tubular spikes or nipples. Percussion caps of the type used to set off contemporary rifled muskets were fitted to these nipples so that no matter what orientation the grenade struck the ground, it would explode. As you can imagine, troops found the Excelsior more than a little terrifying. Not only was the grenade unlikely to detonate if it landed on soft ground, allowing enemy troops to pick it up and lob it back at the thrower, but short of removing all the percussion caps and reinstalling them at the last minute, there was no safety mechanism to prevent it from exploding if accidentally dropped. In 1865, inventor John Adams of Massachusetts, no, not that John Adams, came up with a grenade design that would prove hugely influential. Instead of a simple length of slow match or a percussion igniter, his grenade used a friction igniter based on the principle of an ordinary household match. A hollow wooden cone inserted into a baseball-sized grenade was filled with a short train of black powder serving as a 5-second delay fuse and topped off with a mixture of potassium chlorate and antimony sulfide, into which was embedded a jagged metal friction bar. This in turn was attached via a short piece of cord to a leather strap worn around the thrower's wrist, such that when the grenade was thrown, the friction bar would be ripped out of the fuse, igniting the friction composition and the 5-second delay. Though very sensitive to moisture, the friction igniter worked regardless of the terrain into which the grenade was thrown. Indeed, a similar system had been adopted by the French in 1847, with a Model 1847 grenade remaining in service all the way into 1915. As we shall see, friction igniters would also go on to be used in a variety of grenades around the world, including a famous German design used until the end of the Second World War. Yet despite this brief renaissance, as combat became more fluid in the latter years of the Civil War, grenades once again fell by the wayside. Over the next half-century, grenades saw only sporadic combat use, notably by naval boarding parties during the 1864 to 1870 Paraguayan War between Paraguay and an alliance of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, and the War of the Pacific. No, not that one, the 1879 to 1884 one between Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. And as always, whenever a battle descended into siege warfare, improvised grenades were sure to make an appearance. For example, during the siege of Mafeking during the Second Boer War or South African War of 1899 to 1902, the British defenders used fishing rods as improvised spring catapults to hurl homemade grenades at the Boer attackers. But by the turn of the 20th century, it looked as though grenades would be consigned to the dustbin of history, with the British War Office declaring in 1902 that they had no place in modern warfare. Indeed, an 1887 American treatise on ammunition had the following to say on the subject of grenades. They are used chiefly for the defense of places against assault, being thrown amongst the storming parties in the ditch. They are useful for the defense of houses. They can be thrown by hand for 20 or 30 meters. They are now rarely demanded. When men are using them, they should be cautioned not to retain the grenade too long in their hands. However, this long unloved weapon was about to make a major comeback. On February the 9th, 1904, following a long dispute over naval operations in the Pacific, the Empire of Japan attacked the Russian Eastern Fleet of Port Arthur in eastern China, kicking off the Russo-Japanese War. In August of that year, Japanese forces then attacked Port Arthur from the land, but thanks to strong, well-defended Russian fortifications, the battle quickly devolved into a long, bloody siege featuring weapons and tactics like machine guns, massive artillery bombardments, and extensive trench networks, presaging the infamous conditions of the coming Great War. Desperate to break the deadlock, both sides turned to any weapon available, including grenades. The first grenade used in the conflict were built by the Japanese and were little more sophisticated than what had come before, being fashioned from lengths of bamboo, steel pipe, or even empty food tins filled with explosives and fitted with lengths of time fuses and wooden handles to allow them to be thrown further. The only difference was that the weapons were now filled with high explosives like pyroxylin and picric acid instead of black gunpowder. Meanwhile, the Russians improvised their own grenades from old explosive cannonballs or sections of brass artillery shell casings filled with dynamite and fitted with 15-second sections of mining safety fuse. Eventually, however, designs on both sides were standardized and began to be mass-produced, with the Russians establishing no fewer than 3 factories in Port Arthur capable of turning out 1,000 grenades per day. In total, some 44,000 grenades of all types were used over the course of the 5-month siege, the weapons quickly becoming a fixture of everyday combat tactics. As Norwegian journalist Benjamin Wegner Norregard, embedded with the Imperial Japanese Army, reported, "It has been interesting to note how the hand grenade, as the siege progressed, gained steadily increasing importance until it became the main weapon of both armies in all fighting at close quarters. The terrible effect of these hand grenades against living men soon opened the Japanese soldiers' eyes to the value of this new weapon as a means of offense. It was, to them, just like carrying artillery right into the enemy's position for use in hand-to-hand encounters where their shell and shrapnel could be of no assistance." Military observers from around the world were on hand to witness this new form of combat, and they took special notice of the key role played by grenades. Despite the War Office having written off grenades as obsolete just 2 years before, in 1904, General Aylmer Halden, a British observer of the Russo-Japanese War, instructed the Board of Ordnance to develop a standard grenade based on Russian and Japanese models. 4 years later, the Royal Arsenal at Woolwich unveiled the British Army's first modern grenade, the aptly named Grenade No. 1. The weapon comprised a short steel tube filled with picric acid or Luddite and fitted with a 40-centimeter cane handle. The explosive charge was surrounded by a segmented metal fragmentation ring and set off by an impact fuse at the head of the grenade. This, in turn, was covered by a brass safety cap retained by a safety pin, which was removed just prior to throwing. The grenade was further fitted with a wire loop for hanging from a belt and a long cloth ribbon to stabilize it in flight, ensuring that it landed detonator first. Yet despite taking 4 years to develop, in a classic case of government incompetence, the General Grenade No. 1 proved overly complicated and difficult to mass produce, requiring a special detonator that could only be produced at the Royal Arsenal. Consequently, by the time the Great War broke out in August of 1914, only 420 Grenade No. 1s had been produced. Meanwhile, an enterprising businessman was succeeding where the British government had failed. In 1906, engineer Frederick Martin Hale of the Cotton Powder Company devised a grenade very similar to the No. 1, but far more reliable and easy to mass produce. In addition to a regular hand-thrown version, Hale also designed a variant designed to be fired from an ordinary infantry rifle, allowing it to be launched out to ranges of up to 350 yards. Reportedly inspired by the thought of what would happen if a rifle were fitted with a ramrod or cleaning rod left in the barrel, Hale fitted his grenade with a short metal rod which was then inserted down the muzzle of a rifle, the whole combination being launched using a special blank cartridge. Over the next 4 years, Hale offered his design no fewer than 4 times to the British War Office, only to be turned down, the chief draftsman at Woolwich dismissing his grenade as a crazy and audacious monstrosity. Undeterred, Hale tried to court the international market, demonstrating his grenades to 18 nations including France, Spain, Germany, Russia, and Mexico. His first major client was Spain, who first used Hale's rifle grenade against Moroccan rebels in 1909. However, the idea of firing grenades from a handheld firearm was nothing new. Indeed, the School of Infantry Museum at Warminster holds in its collection an odd device called the Tinker's Mortar, dating from 1681. This consisted of a short flintlock musket with a large metal cup on a chamber built into its butt, which could be propped up using a set of fold-out bipod legs. A gunpowder charge was poured into the chamber, a standard ball-type hand grenade placed in the cup, and a tap turned to open a channel between the chamber and the flintlock mechanism. When the trigger was pulled, a flash would travel from the lock to the chamber, launching the grenade. Like full-size mortars of this period, this weapon required the operator to light the fuse on the grenade prior to launching it, a potentially fraught procedure, for if the launching charge failed to go off, the operator was liable to quote, hoist by his own petard. However, for much of history, such devices were exceedingly rare curiosities, and rifle grenades were not widely used until the 20th century. In any event, after further pestering from Hale, in 1910, the War Office finally relented and acquired 50 Hale's grenades for formal trials. While the Ordnance Board declined to adopt the weapon, they did instruct the Royal Armoury at Woolwich to develop a copy, a task at which they failed. In 1913, Hale once again convinced the War Office to conduct troop trials, and while this time they officially accepted his design as the grenade number 2, they only placed a token order of 50 units. But if the War Office was lukewarm about the utility of grenades, its attitude was to change dramatically as the British Empire found itself dragged into the Great War, a conflict, it is worth noting, partially triggered through the use of grenades. On June the 28th, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife, Sofia, were assassinated while visiting Sarajevo. The assassination was carried out by a group of Serb nationalists who were armed with a combination of automatic pistols and the standard hand grenade of the Serbian army. The attack began at 10:10 a.m. when one of the assassins lobbed a grenade at Archduke Ferdinand's motorcade. The weapon bounced off the folded convertible top of the Archduke's car, clattering into the street and detonating under the next car in the motorcade, destroying it and wounding 20 people. The rest of the cars managed to speed away and deliver the Archduke and his wife to their intended reception at the Sarajevo town hall. However, the couple decided to abandon their planned program in favor of visiting the people wounded in the bombing in the hospital, and on their return journey, their motorcade was attacked again by conspirator Gavrilo Princip, who fatally shot Ferdinand and Sophie with a .380 caliber FN 1910 pistol. As a brief aside, while it's commonly stated the outrage from this sparked World War I, this is not actually accurate at all. In fact, the Emperor Franz Joseph himself expressed relief over the assassination because it rid him of an heir whom he deeply disliked. The Emperor commented that God will not be mocked. A higher power had put back the order I could not maintain. And it wasn't just the emperor who was relieved. It was reported by an Austrian newspaper that the general consensus among the various political circles was that the assassination, though a tragedy, was for the best. As far as the Austrian people were concerned, it was noted the event almost failed to make any impression whatsoever. On Sunday and Monday, the crowds in Vienna listened to music and drank wine as if nothing had happened. Indeed, it took the government itself a full 3 weeks to react. So why go to war over an assassination if nobody cared? Because while nobody seemed to much care about the assassination itself, Austria-Hungary had been looking for an excuse to wage a preventative war against Serbia as a state in order to weaken or destroy them so as to take back territory in the Balkans, which had been taken during the Balkan Wars. They had not taken it back up to this point because they lacked Germany's support. Without that support, they feared Russia too much because of the treaty Russia had with Serbia. With the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife on June 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary was able to secure the promise from Germany that it would aid in a war with Serbia and possibly Russia if Russia chose to enter the fray due to their treaty with Serbia. It should be noted here that Austria-Hungary did not really expect Russia to enter the fray, as they expected this to be a very small war that would be over quickly before Russia would be obligated to respond. Now, with Germany's support, if Russia did enter the fray, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia with remarkably severe terms that Serbia would be sure to reject, thus giving Austria-Hungary an excuse to go launch a limited war on Serbia to reclaim territory in the Balkans. Surprisingly, Serbia responded relatively well to the ultimatum, but they did dispute a few minor clauses, which gave Austria-Hungary the excuse they needed to go to war. At this point, due to a variety of existing treaties between various nations, this escalated the minor clash into the First Great War. At first, the fighting on the Western Front was fluid and mobile, and there was little use for grenades. By the winter of 1914 to 1915, however, the series of flanking maneuvers known as the Race to the Sea resulted in the establishment of two parallel lines of trenches extending some 760 kilometers from the Swiss border to the Belgian coast. Thus, instead of the quick, decisive victory military planners had hoped for, the war on the Western Front devolved into a bloody stalemate of trench warfare that would not be broken for another 4 years. As during the Russo-Japanese War, the combatants latched onto any newfangled weapon that could help break the deadlock, including hand grenades. But with a paltry 420 No. 1 grenades in its arsenal at the outbreak of the war, and little capacity to produce more, the British War Office hastily ordered large numbers of grenades from commercial manufacturers like our old friend Frederick Martin Hale. These included a consignment of Hale's rifle grenades originally ordered by the government of Mexico for riot control, but which were never delivered and instead diverted for use by the British Expeditionary Forces. The French were also caught off guard by the outbreak of the war, only being equipped with the antiquated Model 1847. They thus adopted the Asen Excelsior grenade developed by the Norwegian inventor Niels Waltersen Asen and established a factory which by March of 1915 was producing some 10,000 grenades every single day. But even these measures could not keep up with the war's insatiable demand, so while both government and private factories geared up for mass production, the soldiers on the front were forced to improvise, devising all manner of crude homemade grenades. One common type, known as the jam tin grenade, was exactly what it sounds like: a metal food tin filled with explosives and sometimes rocks or metal debris as wounding fragments and fitted with a detonator and short piece of safety fuse. Another type, known as the hairbrush grenade, consisted of a flat wooden board with a handle to which was bolted a sheet metal box filled with explosives and either a length of safety fuse or a more sophisticated friction igniter. When domestic production of more sophisticated grenade designs took longer than anticipated to ramp up, the British filled the gap by developing standardized mass-produced versions of these improvised weapons, specifically the No. 8 and No. 9 jam tin and No. 12 hairbrush grenades. In November of 1914, the Royal Engineers Field Companies set up a number of field factories, including one at Bethune, France, capable of turning out thousands of grenades every week. But even when officially produced grenades like the No. 1 and the No. 2 Hale's pattern finally began to reach troops on the front, they proved woefully unsuited to the realities of trench warfare. Like the Civil War era Ketchum grenade, the No. 1 needed to land squarely on its detonator in order to function and could easily be defeated by soft ground or by enemies setting up blankets, nets, or wooden boards over their trenches. Even worse, the grenade's long cane handle proved a menace in the cramped confines of the trenches, for when soldiers wound up their arms to throw the grenade, the detonator would sometimes strike the rear wall of the trench, detonating the grenade and blowing up the soldier. Whoops-a-doodle. A version with a shorter handle, the No. 3, was eventually issued, as was a version using a more easily obtained commercial detonator, the No. 18. This required the explosive to be switched to tonite, a mixture of gun cotton and barium nitrate. But it soon became clear that the design was fundamentally flawed and that something far superior was needed. That something was patented in January of 1915 by one William Mills, an inventor from Sunderland. Mills' design, which soon became known as the Mills bomb, represented a huge leap forward in grenade technology and set the pattern for nearly every subsequent grenade design all the way to the present day. Measuring 95 millimeters long and 61 millimeters in diameter and weighing 765 grams, the egg-shaped Mills featured deep grooves molded into the outer casing, giving it the iconic pineapple appearance still associated with hand grenades to this day. Contrary to popular belief, these grooves were not designed to aid with fragmentation, but rather to help the thrower grip the grenade with a muddy or wet hand. Indeed, later experiments revealed that the weapon did not fracture along the grooves, but the revolutionary aspect of the Mills bomb was not its shape, but rather its firing mechanism, which Mills claimed made his design the world's first safe grenade. The grenade was set off by a detonator connected to a 5-second length of delay fuse set off by a percussion cap. This cap was struck by a spring-loaded firing pin retained by a curved handle, or spoon, which lay flush against the body of the grenade, and which itself was retained by a pull-out safety pin. To use the grenade, the thrower gripped the spoon tightly against the body, pulled out the safety pin, then threw the grenade. As the grenade left the thrower's hand, spring pressure caused the spoon to hinge away from the body, releasing the firing pin to strike the percussion cap and ignite the delay fuse. Testing revealed the design to be sound and reliable, and in April of 1915, the War Office placed an order for 5 million Mills bombs from the Mills munition factory in Birmingham. But production took longer than expected to ramp up, so in the interim, the British issued a number of stopgap designs, including the number 6 and number 7 friction-fused grenades, the number 15 cricket ball grenade, and the number 13 and number 14 pitcher percussion fused grenades. However, all of these designs proved unreliable and even dangerous, with the pitcher's grenade's percussion fuse being so temperamental that soldiers issued it referred to themselves as the Suicide Club. The number 15 cricket ball grenade was especially unusual, using a chemical friction fuse that had to be struck against a special brashard worn on the thrower's left arm as one would strike a match. To make up for the shortfall in number 5 Mills bomb production, the British produced more than 4.2 million number 15 grenades, issuing them in large numbers prior to the Battle of Loos in September of 1915. Though planners hoped that the grenades would help troops clear enemy trenches, damp weather ruined the fuses and rendered the weapons effectively useless, contributing partially to the overall failure of the battle, which claimed more than 59,000 British Commonwealth casualties. Following this disaster, the remaining number 15 grenades were shipped to drier theaters like Russia and the Middle East. But by early 1916, Mills bomb production had finally caught up to demand, and the revolutionary new grenades began appearing on the Western Front in large numbers. General Sir John French, commander of the British Expeditionary Force, wanted all British soldiers to be trained in the use of grenades, or bombs as they were generally known in the British service. Initially, however, grenades were only issued to small, specialized squads of bombers, handpicked from the best soldiers of each unit. These bombing squads were used as elite shock troops to clear out enemy trenches ahead of a main infantry attack or for carrying out smaller trench raids. While the composition of bombing squads changed throughout the war, early on they typically comprised 4 men, 2 throwers carrying canvas buckets full of grenades, and 2 bayonet men to protect the throwers from enemy attack. Later, a pair of spare men were added to help carry more grenades, as well as rifle grenadiers to conduct long-range attacks. As a rifle would encumber their movement and throwing ability, in addition to their grenades, the bombers were typically lightly armed with a pistol, knife, or knob carry, or trench glove for close-quarter fighting. The use of specialized bombing parties was largely driven by Army General Headquarters' belief that ordinary soldiers would become overly dependent on grenades to the detriment of their regular musketry skills. While this rather cowardly view of the average British Tommy proved unfounded, the bombing squad model remained enforced until 1916, during which time bombing tactics became increasingly sophisticated. For example, the purpose of bombing changed from a means in itself, i.e. killing all the occupants of an enemy trench or dugout directly, to forcing enemy soldiers out into the open where they could be cut down with machine guns and other weapons. Thus, rather than a secret weapon that would win the war on its own, the grenade became one part of the overall movement towards coordinated, combined armed tactics that in 1918 would finally succeed in breaking the deadlock on the Western Front. Indeed, by 1917, the Entente powers had become so good at capturing and holding ground that the slow and cumbersome bombing parties were no longer able to keep up with the speed of the advance, and so bombing began to be taught as a universal skill and grenades issued to all soldiers. But while the number 5 Mills bomb was revolutionary and generally dependable, it was not without its faults. Early in its deployment, soldiers discovered to their horror that even a small movement of the safety spoon would potentially release the firing pin and set off the grenade, even with the safety pin still inserted. This alarming flaw led to over 30 deaths and injuries in Army training schools before it was corrected. In 1917, an improved version of the Mills bomb was introduced featuring a threaded base plug for inserting a Hale-style rifle launching rod. However, the immense pressures produced by launching such a heavy projectile quickly bulged the rifle's barrel, making it useless for ordinary shooting. Therefore, dedicated rifles, often wrapped in metal wire to strengthen them, were usually set aside specifically for launching grenades. The unstreamlined, unstabilized grenades also suffer from poor accuracy at short ranges, though even this was better than the alternative. Lacking sufficient numbers of rifle grenades or trench mortars, early in the war the British deployed a number of mechanical devices to lob grenades long distances, including the Leach Trench catapult and the West Spring gun. As one soldier, Guy Chapman, recalled, these contraptions were less serious weapons of war and more like something Wile E. Coyote would order from the Acme catalog. He states, the West Spring Gun was supposed to hurl a hand grenade with more force and accuracy into an enemy's lines. In practice, it was much more apt to shoot the missile straight up into the air to return to the marksman's head. Supposing he still possessed one, for the machine was also calculated to decapitate the engineer if he was clumsy enough to stand in front of its whirling arm. In addition, the West Spring Gun was heavy and cumbersome with limited traverse capability, and unlike the Leach catapult, which could be propped up against the trench parapet, required its own dedicated 1 meter squared emplacement. Thankfully, in 1917, the British introduced yet another variant of the Mills bomb, the No. 36, which could be fitted with a circular metal gas check plate screwed onto its base. This allowed the grenade to be fixed to the muzzle of a standard issue Lee Enfield No. 1 Mark III rifle. Range was adjusted by opening and closing a sliding door in the side of the cup, allowing more or less propellant gas to leak out. This system placed far less stress on the rifle's barrel, allowing it to be used for regular shooting. From 1916 onwards, the French deployed a similar cup-based system called the Vivier or VB grenade. However, unlike the British Mills rifle grenade, which could only be launched using a blank cartridge, the VB grenade could be launched with a regular live round. The grenade featured a central channel through which the bullet could pass, striking a leaf spring and arming the time fuse before the propellant gas behind the bullet launched the grenade out of the cup. When American troops began arriving in the Western Front in 1917, they also adopted the VB as their standard rifle grenade. As with earlier No. 23, a waterproof version of the No. 36 called the No. 36M was produced for use in tropical climates, the M standing for Mesopotamia. Between June 1915 and the end of the war in November of 1918, the British produced nearly 12 million Mills bombs of all types, the type remaining the standard British Army hand grenade into the Second World War and beyond. In 1932, the No. 36 was declared obsolete and only the No. 36M produced thereafter. The type ceased to be actively used as a rifle grenade in 1945, but was not declared obsolete in this role until 1962. Thus, despite being the first of its kind, the ingenious Mills bomb served with distinction for nearly 5 decades. Meanwhile, on the other side of the trenches, the Germans had developed another iconic hand grenade design. In addition to Hale's-style rodded rifle grenade, Germany entered the Great War with a ball hand grenade, a 1 kilogram, 80mm diameter segmented cast iron sphere filled with a mixture of black gunpowder, barium nitrate, and potassium perchlorate, and set off by a friction pull igniter. However, this weapon was heavy and cumbersome to carry and only issued to specialist assault troops, leaving Germany without a standard hand grenade for ordinary troops. Thus, in 1914, the German army introduced the stick hand grenade, commonly nicknamed the potato masher by Western forces. The grenade comprised a thin, cylindrical sheet steel canister filled with 170 grams of TNT and fitted to a hollow wooden handle, allowing it to be thrown up to 27 meters. As in their earlier design in 1913, the explosive charge was set off by a detonator and 5-second delay fuse ignited by a friction pull igniter. This was attached to a length of string tripped by a ceramic bead contained within the hollow wooden handle. To use the grenade, the thrower unscrewed a metal cap at the base of the handle, allowing the string and bead to fall out. They would then either pull sharply on the cord before throwing the grenade or hold the bead between their fingers as they threw, activating the igniter as the grenade flew from their hand. Early versions featured a metal clip to allow the grenade to be hung from a belt, though this feature was eliminated from later versions like the Model 1924, used throughout most of the Second World War. And while a fragmentation sleeve called the splittering was later developed that slid over the standard explosive charge, the stick hand grenade was designed to wound and kill via blast effect alone. Indeed, it is worth pausing here to discuss the two basic types of anti-personnel grenades. Traditional grenades like the Mills bomb or the iconic American M2 pineapple grenade, which produce large numbers of lethal fragments, are known as defensive grenades. This is because the lethal radius of the fragments is greater than the distance a soldier can realistically throw the grenade, meaning that these weapons must be used from behind cover. Offensive grenades, on the other hand, are designed to produce as few fragments as possible, meaning their lethal radius is smaller than their maximum throwing range. This allows them to be used in the open while on the advance, hence the name. As we've seen, the Great War was a watershed moment for the hand grenade, turning it from an obscure specialist weapon used only in certain rare circumstances to an invaluable part of every soldier's arsenal. So dramatic and total was this transformation that most of the basic grenade design principles developed from 1915 to 1918 are still followed today. Indeed, the DNA of the original Mills bomb can be clearly seen in modern hand grenades like the American M26 and M67, the two differing only in relatively minor design details. For example, most modern grenades use the so-called mousetrap igniter design, in which the firing pin swings around 90 degrees on a leaf spring rather linearly as in the Mills bomb. Also, to ensure more consistent and lethal fragmentation, most modern grenades no longer depend on scoring or segmenting the grenade body, but rather contain either a large number of steel balls or a coil of metal wire notched at regular intervals. Of course, there are many other types of grenades used by militaries around the world, including smoke, anti-tank, and incendiary varieties, but these are a bit beyond the scope of this video, with some having already been covered in previous videos, like the fascinating story behind the Molotov cocktail and how it got its name, and the badass story of the Dad's Army. So while this is by no means a complete history of the hand grenade, we'd like to think we at least came close, which, after all, counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.